Good evening, everyone. Please confirm if the screen is visible. So I'm Dr. Tanushree, and I welcome you all to another session of CUET UG Vijeta Series. So today in this session, you will know about biodiversity and its conservation from Unit 5, that is Ecology and Environment. So I can see the participants are joining. So I'll start the class in a minute. Let's the participants join the session. Okay, thank you, Magesh, for confirming. So how are you all? I'm sure you all are enjoying the classes. Today it's day 11 session. So very good evening to all the participants, those who have joined now. So why we are studying about biodiversity today? Yes, why is it important to study about biodiversity and its conservation? Definitely we have to prepare for the exam for CUET UG, and this is one of the topic, the subunit of unit 5. So it is important to study about it, right? Because we can expect questions from here. But even if we relate it to our day to day life, if we relate it to this planet earth, don't you think it is something a very important topic, right? We are facing so many issues: global warming, pollution, right? Many species are getting extinct. The food chain, the food web is affected. So don't you think it is very, very important to know about this biodiversity? Because once we know what is biodiversity, what is the importance of biodiversity, then only we can understand about it, about its importance, as well as what are the factors which are affecting this biodiversity, extinction of the species, changes in environmental conditions. Then only we can formulate the conservation plans, right? So this is the reason that this topic is not only important from exam point of view, but also it is very much important if we relate it to our day to day life, if we relate it to our life, human life, existence on planet earth. So let's get started. Let's first understand what is biodiversity. Life originated on Earth nearly 3.8 billion years ago. And since then, there had been enormous diversification of life forms on Earth. I'm sure you all know that there are a variety of animals, plants, fungi, and even microorganisms like bacteria that make up our natural world. And these organisms, they work together in ecosystem like an intricate web to maintain balance and support life. So term biodiversity, that has been taken from biological diversity, refers to the sum total of diversity that exists at all levels of biological organization. So it refers to variety of life on earth at all its levels. That is from genes to ecosystems, and encompass the evolutionary, ecological, and cultural processes that sustain life. Now, according to IUCN, that is International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, the total number of plant and animal species described so far is more than 1.5 million. But still, we have still no clear idea of how many species are yet to be discovered and described. So this is, I'm talking about the number of species recorded in the world. And still there are species, many species, 6 million of species waiting to be discovered and named. Even if we talk specifically about India, then here about 45,000 species of plants and twice as many species of animals have been recorded. So that means the ratio of animals to plant is 2:1. But still, there are a lot of species of plants and animals yet to be discovered and described. So question arises, what are the main components of this biodiversity? So here you can see that there are three main components of biodiversity, that is genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecological diversity. So it's very easy to remember what is genetic diversity. Diversity at the genetic level. Diversity means heterogeneity at the genetic level, right? We, even if we talk about, if you compare humans to other animals, right, we don't have the same genetic makeup, right? There are some variations present. So there are diversity which are present at genetic level, if in plants, in animals, right? Then what is species diversity? It is the diversity which is present at species level. And ecological diversity, it's the diversity present at ecosystem level. So when I say diversity at genetic level, it means that a single species might show high diversity at genetic level over its distribution range. So, like India has 50,000 genetically different strains of rice. There are about 1,000 varieties of mangoes which are available. Then, diversity at species level. The example is Western Ghats. They have greater amphibian species diversity than Eastern Ghats. And then when we talk about ecological diversity, so it's the diversity at ecosystem level. The example is of India, where we have deserts, rainforest, mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, estuaries, alpine meadows. So they have greater, India has a greater ecosystem diversity than Scandinavian country like Norway, right? So these are the three main components of biodiversity that you have to keep in mind. Hello, Sheikh. You asked me that this lecture is useful for CSIR Net. So, Sheikh, if you see Unit 10 of CSIR Net, so that is all about ecology and ecology, right? And also there are subunit in this particular uh, in Unit 10, which is all about the conservation and about the biodiversity. So, yes, I can say that it will be useful for this lecture. Will be useful for that also, but as this is particularly for CUET UG, the level is, the information that I'll be providing will be according to that. Okay. I hope this answers your question. So coming back to the topic, so can anyone tell me how many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Can you estimate how many species are there on Earth and how many, if we specifically talk about India, how many are there in India? So you can think about it. So before proceeding ahead, let me tell you about our BioTecNika app and Telegram group as well. So you can not only connect to us through this session, through this CUET UG series, Vijeta series, but also you can connect to us through our BioTecNika app, and even you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. So when you download the BioTecNika app, there you will get information about the the jobs, the webinars, the certification courses. Even you can go through the podcasts available, articles available, and even you can join our BioTecNika Telegram group. So coming back to my question now, I hope you have thought about it. How many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Well, it's definitely a tricky question, a difficult question, Because when we talk about the number of species, right? So there is a very interesting aspects about Earth's biodiversity based on the currently available species inventories. So of the named species, more than 70% are animals. Okay, so this I'm specifically talking about the species whose nomenclature is already been done. We have already named the species. So known species we are talking about, and here 70%, more than 70% are animals, and of which 70% are insects. That is, among animals, insects are the most species rich taxonomic group. You can see here, making up more than 70% of the total. So that means out of every 10 animal on this planet, 7 are insects. Then when we talk about plants, so plants, they comprise no more than 22% of the total. So plants include algae, fungi, bryophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms, right? And as you can see here, the number of fungi species in the world is more than the combined total of species of the fish, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. So group fungi has more species than all the vertebrate species combined. However, biologists, they are not sure about how many prokaryotic species there might be, because many species are not cultivable under laboratory conditions. We cannot cultivate all the microorganisms in the laboratory, even all the bacteria in the laboratory. And even the conventional taxonomic methods which are available are not suitable for identifying microbial species. So if we consider the molecular criteria or biochemical criteria for studying these species, for this to study these prokaryotic species, then their diversity alone might run in millions. So this is the data we are talking about, named ones only. And when we talk about India, India has only 2.4% of world's land area, but its share of global species diversity is quite impressive, 8.1%. And this is the reason that it makes our country one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. So you can see out of 2.4% of the world's land area, the global species diversity is 8.1%. Now moving on to patterns of biodiversity. So there are two patterns of biodiversity. One is latitudinal gradients, another is species area relationships. So what is latitudinal gradients? For many group of animals or plants, there are interesting patterns in diversity. And the most well-known being is the latitudinal gradients in diversity. So when we talk about diversity of plants and animals, it is very important to understand that it is not uniform throughout the world. It's not that the plants and animals which are present in different parts of the world, their number is uniform. No, they show an uneven distribution. And when you compare the temperate regions, the tropical regions, you will find that species diversity is highest in tropics. That means it decreases as we move from equator towards the pole. So here are the examples. You can see that the tropics harbor more species than temperate or polar areas. Like Colombia, located near the equator, has nearly 1,400 species of birds, while New York at 41° north has 105 species. Greenland has 56 species. And India, when we talk about India, which has much of its land area in tropical latitudes, has more than 1,200 species of birds. Even when we see the forest in tropical region, they have 10 times as many species of vascular plants as forest of equal area in temperate region. Also, the largely tropical Amazonian rainforest in South America has the greatest biodiversity on Earth. Like it is home to more than 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 of fishes, 1,300 of birds, and 427 of mammals. Also, there are 427 of amphibians, 378 of reptiles, and more than 1,000, like more than 1,25,000 invertebrates. So scientists estimate that in these rainforests there might be at least 2 million insect species waiting to be discovered and named. So all this data, it proves that the tropical regions, they harbor more species than temperate or the polar areas. So question arises, what could be the reason for species richness of tropics? Like, what is so special about tropics that might account for their greater biological diversity? So, various hypotheses has been proposed by ecologists and evolutionary biologists, and they have proposed some important hypotheses. So, some of them are I have mentioned here. So, first is tropics had more evolutionary time. So, when we talk about speciation, it is generally a function of time. And when we compare tropical region with temperate region, the temperate regions, they are basically subjected to uh, frequent disturbances like glaciations in the past, but tropical regions, they have not been disturbed. They remain undisturbed for millions of years, and as a result they have a very long evolutionary time. They had a very long evolutionary time for species diversification. So this is the reason tropical regions are more rich in diversity, species diversity. They have greater biological diversity than temperate region. Another reason is that the tropical region provide a relatively constant environment. So unlike the temperate regions, the tropical environment, they are less seasonal, they are constant, and because of the constant environment, like not too much disturbances are there, that lead to greater species diversity. So constant environment promotes the specialization and leads to greater species diversity. It promotes speciation. And the third reason is that they receive more solar energy, which contributes to greater productivity. So as we all know that sun is the ultimate source of energy. So if more solar energy is available in the tropics, and that leads to greater productivity, higher productivity, and which in turn might contribute indirectly to greater diversity. So for exam point of view, you all have to remember these 3 points that answers the question that why the tropics have greater biological diversity. Then another topic is species area relationship. So what is species area relationship? It states that species richness is also a function of area of the region. So like here you can see a graph is being plotted between species richness and area, where species richness is plotted on y-axis and area is plotted on x-axis. So according to the study of German naturalist and geographer Alexander von Humboldt, observed that within a region, species richness increases with increasing explored area, but only up to a limit. So as you can see here, the species richness increases with the increased explored area. So here the species richness is on y-axis and area is on x-axis. But only up to a limit. It's not limitless. And usually the species area relationship is a rectangular hyperbolic function, which is represented here with this blue line. And this relationship on logarithmic scale, it's like its relationship is a straight line for, and we can describe it with an equation which is mentioned here. Log S equals to log C plus Z log A, where S is the species richness, A is the area, Z is the slope of the line or regression coefficient, and C is the y-intercept. Now, ecologists, they have discovered that the value of the Z, it lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2, regardless of the taxonomic group or the region. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's the plant present in Britain or birds in California or molluscus in New York State, the slope of the regression line will be similar. However, if we analyze the species area relationship on the large area, on very large area, like let's consider a continent. So in that case, it was observed that the slope of the line is much steeper, and the Z value will lie in range of 0.6 to 1.2. Now, steeper means what? Steeper means, like, if I simply draw three lines here, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So like here you can see this, let me label it as A, B, and C. So this A1 will be having more, like it will be more steep. And C1 will be less steep. So steep here means, the steeper slopes here means that the slopes are closer to vertical axis. So where is the vertical axis? This is the vertical axis, right? And this is your horizontal axis. So steeper slopes means that slopes will be closer to the vertical axis, or you can say that it will make larger angle with respect to horizontal axis. So if I just, like, the angles formed will be, you can see. So this one, A1 is forming a larger angle with the horizontal axis. So what is the significance of the steeper slopes? Steeper slopes here signifies that the number of species found increases faster than the area explored in very large area, like entire continent. Like if you see, if you compare this and if you compare it with the x-axis, obviously the y-axis is representing species richness, right? So if I simply draw a line here, right? So what will happen? It will be indicating what? It will be indicating that the number of species, they are increasing faster than the area which is being explored in a, like in very large areas like the entire continent. So this concept of steepness is, the steeper slope is also very much important that you have to keep in mind. Now, so far we have discussed about what is biodiversity. We have discussed about the main components, three main components of biodiversity. And also I told you about the, like why the tropical regions, they have more biodiversity, more greater biological diversity than the temperate regions. So what is the importance of biodiversity? So to understand the importance of biodiversity, we have to ask few questions to ourselves. First question is, does the number of species in a community really matter to the functioning of the ecosystem? What do you think? Does the number of species in a community will really matter to the ecosystem, functioning of the ecosystem? Definitely yes, because ecosystem is an interacting system between biotic and abiotic components, right? So the species number and diversity, it plays a very important part in functioning of this unit. So ecologists, they believe that communities with more species generally tend to be more stable than those with less species. Now, what is the meaning of stability here? So related to that, I have another question for you all. That is, what exactly is stability for a biological community? So stability means that the stability of the community is defined as the state of the community where the productivity of the ecosystem is high and constant, irrespective of the change in environmental conditions. So it is observed that ecosystem with more species will show less variation in its productivity, irrespective of any environmental changes that are taking place or invasion of alien species if occurring. So why is it so? They are not they are showing less variations, like more species will show less variation in its productivity, because they must be either resistant or resilient to occasional disturbances. It can be natural or man-made, and even they are resistant to invasions by alien species. So exactly, we don't know how these attributes are linked to species richness in a community. But David Tillman's long-term ecosystem experiments using outdoor plots provide some tentative answers. David Tillman plots have shown that more species in an ecosystem have shown less variation in total biomass and contributed to higher productivity. So how we can relate, like, higher productivity? Why higher productivity you are getting? Because increase in species number increases the efficiency of food web, and the net productivity increases, and this makes the ecosystem resilient. Then third question: does it really matter to us if a few species become extinct? What do you think? Does it really matter to us? Rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health but imperative for the very survival of human race on this planet. At this time, we are losing species at an alarming pace. So one might ask, does it really matter to us if a few species become extinct? Extinct means that when all the members of that species are dead. So let's answer this question by considering the effects of extinction of species. So one is the hypothesis we are considering here by Paul Ehrlich, rivet popper hypothesis. So here, let's consider an aeroplane. Okay, let's understand this hypothesis with an example. So let's consider an aeroplane, and the all the parts of the aeroplanes are joined by thousands of rivets. Now just imagine if the passengers, they start taking out all the rivets, like they start popping out a rivet. So initially there will be no impact, but if more and more rivets are removed, don't you think it will make the aeroplane weak? Now consider this aeroplane, now related to the ecosystem. So now consider this aeroplane to be an ecosystem, right? Rivets, now you consider them to be a species, and passengers, like the anthropogenic activities or humans, right? So they start killing the species. So don't you think if the humans, through the anthropogenic activities, if they start killing the species present in the ecosystem, initially there will be no impact, right? But just remember, if more and more species are removed, it will make the entire ecosystem weak, resulting into wiping out of the ecosystem, right? So yes, definitely it matters if the species are getting extinct. And also it is important to know that which rivet is being removed, which species been lost. Like in an aeroplane, if you're removing the rivet from the wings, obviously it will pose a more threat to the flight safety than if you are losing a rivet from the seats or windows inside the plane. Now consider to this rivet which is present in the wings to be a keystone species. What is a keystone species? A species that has a huge impact on the ecosystem, and is the source of energy for many species. So example is ficus species. So ficus is a keystone species. Why it is a keystone species? Because the ficus provide food and shelter to many birds, reptiles, frogs, bats, insects, fungi, crustaceans. So just imagine if this species get extinct. So all other species which are associated, which are depends on this particular species, don't you think they will be affected? Obviously, the extinction of such keystone species will have a major and immediate impact on the dependent species. Then it results into imbalance in the food chain also. If the few species become extinct, then definitely it will affect the food chain, right? What is food chain? It's the linear network of link in a food web, which is starting from producer organism and ending at an apex predator species, which can be detrivorous or decomposer species. So it is ending at an predator species or detrivorous or decomposer species. Like here you can see a simple food chain. Grass eaten by grasshopper, grasshopper in turn eaten by frog, frog in turn eaten by hawk. So food chain is a sequence depicting a nutritional or energy flow. One missing species would bring about the extinction of another, right? If the grass is no longer there, what grasshoppers will eat? They will definitely they will die. If you remove the grasshoppers from the food chain, the grasses will increase, right? And the frogs, what they'll eat, they will be affected. So definitely the extinction of a species will affect the food chain and entire food web. And when we specifically talk about humans, they usually belong to top tropic level. And definitely the extinction of species would slowly lead to extinction of the human species too. So definitely extinction of few species will in turn affect human beings. Although might be maybe the effect might not be seen immediately, but over a due course of time it will be seen. Now, in biodiversity, IUCN has a very important role. What is IUCN? It's the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So IUCN, it is also known as like it has a document called as IUCN Red List or Red Data Book. We also call it as. So this IUCN Red List, it was established in 1964, and it's a critical indicator of the health of world's biodiversity. So this IUCN and it categorizes the species, whether they are endangered, whether they are extinct, or whether they are extinct in the wild, or they are is any data deficient. So basically, species are classified by IUCN Red List into 9 categories. And this IUCN this red list categories and criteria, their intention is to make an very easy and widely understood system for classifying the species which are at risk of global extinction. So as I mentioned the names like data deficient, endangered, extinct in the wild. So these are all the categories. So let's talk about these categories in detail. So as you can see here on the screen, so IUCN, these are the IUCN red list. The species are classified by IUCN red list into 9 groups. And they are being specified through criteria like rate of decline, population size, area of geographic distribution, degree of population, and distribution. So the species, some can come under not evaluated, for some data deficient, least concern, near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and extinct. So let's know about them in detail. So what is data deficient? What is this category? IUCN Red List category data deficient. So data deficient means when there is an inadequate information about a species. So you cannot make any kind of when the data is deficient, definitely you cannot make any kind of decision like whether that species has to be put under endangered or vulnerable, or what is the, like we don't have the complete data about what is the risk of the extinction, right? So when there is an inadequate information to make a direct or indirect assessment of its risk of extinction based on its distribution or population status, so that is data deficient. Then least concern, so taxon in this is in this category has been evaluated against the other criteria, but it does not qualify for critically endangered or endangered, vulnerable, or near threatened. So if you compare data deficient and least concern, data deficient in this category, the taxon may be well studied and its biology well known. But because appropriate data on abundance or distribution is lacking, we cannot make any kind of, we cannot make any decision on that species. However, least concern is that they does not qualify the criteria for endangered or vulnerable or near threatened. So the IUCN has made a separate category for such taxon, that is least concern. So here you can see some examples on your screen. So first two, they are the examples for data deficient, and this horsestalks, reed frog, and longy tulip, it is for least concern. Then near threatened. So near threatened are here the taxons in this category, they have been evaluated against criteria but does not qualify for critically endangered or vulnerable. So basically they are close to qualifying or likely to qualify for a threatened category in near future. So that is why the name is given near threatened. So right now they are not qualified for the endangered or critically endangered or vulnerable category, but maybe in the coming future, if their number keep on decreasing, they may be qualified for this threatened category. So that is why the name is given near threatened. And vulnerable, here the taxon belong to this category are considered to be facing high risk of extinction in the wild. So please remember the keywords. I have highlighted the keywords in bold. Like for vulnerable, you can remember high risk. So they have a high risk of extinction. So here this tree frog and this particular uh, storogine bicolor that you see, these are all belongs to vulnerable category, and first two belongs to near threatened. Then endangered. So endangered, here the taxon belong to this category. They consider to be facing a very high risk. And critically endangered, they consider to be facing an extremely high risk for extinction in the world. So here are some examples you can see on the screen. And then coming to extinct in the wild and extinct. So a taxon is presumed extinct in the wild when the exhaustive surveys have been performed and it is observed that there is, like when we talk about extinct in the wild, it means that it is known only to survive in cultivation. A taxon is presumed extinct in the wild when it is known only to survive in cultivation. So like for example, we are growing some plants in a botanical garden, right? But if you try to find this species, a taxon, in the natural environment, then they will not be present. So basically the ecologists, they have failed to record an individual in the wild. So that is why it is mentioned extinct in the wild. They are only known to survive in cultivation, in captivity. And extinct when there is no reasonable doubt that the last individual has died. So here you can see these two examples of olive and tortoise. These are the examples of the extinct. And here this golden skiffia and franklin tree are the examples of extinct in the wild. You will find them in captivity only, but not in the wild environment. And even here are some examples of the species which has been extinct, like dodo, quagga, thylacine, Steeler sea cow, and tiger subspecies. So here, so far we have seen the categories, IUCN 9 categories. And as we are talking, somewhere in any part of the world, the specific, like I'm sure the species, due to the human activities, they will be in danger or will be getting extinct, right? Like IUCN, according to IUCN Red List, this is an old data, but at that time also it was reported that so much of the species have been extinct in last 500 years. And adding to the grim scenario of extinctions is the fact that more than 15,500 species worldwide are facing the threat of extinction. All sort of species, bird species, mammal species, amphibian species, gymnosperm species, they are all facing the threat of extinction. And even the extinction across the text are not random. Some groups like amphibians, they appear to be more vulnerable to extinction. So question arises, what are the causes of biodiversity losses? So far, you have noticed that I'm using a term human activities, right? Anthropogenic activities. So what is the exact reason for biodiversity loss? So here, four main reasons have been highlighted. The main causes of the loss of biodiversity is highlighted. First is habitat loss and fragmentation. This is the most important cause driving animals and plants to extinction. Like when we specifically take an example of Amazon rainforest. So Amazon rainforest, they are considered to be the lungs of the planet because they are so huge that they are called as lungs of the planet, harboring probably millions of species, but they are being cut and cleared. Why? Just to cultivate soya beans or conversion to grassland for raising beef cattle. Besides total loss, the degradation of many habitats by pollution also threatens the survival of many species. So, obviously, if you are cutting a tree, all the species which are dependent on that tree, definitely they will have you have destroyed their home, right? So where they will go? Definitely they will be like all the dependent species will be affected, and the pollution also threatens the survival of many species. Then over exploitation. We humans are dependent on nature for a lot of things, right? For food, for shelter. So we have a need. That's why we are dependent on the environment, right? But what if this need it turns to greed? And this is what is happening now. The need has turned to greed, and that has resulted into over exploitation of natural resources. Many species, which I showed you in the previous slides, the dodo, the passenger pigeon, the Steeler sea cow, they are all being extinct because of the overexploitation by humans. Many fish populations around the world are over harvested and resulting into, because of the over harvesting of the fishes, we are also providing a risk to their existence. Then alien species invasion, whether it is unintentionally or deliberately for whatever purpose, some of the alien species invasion has caused the decline or extinction of indigenous species. I'm sure you must be familiar with the environmental damage caused and threat posed to our native species by invasive weed species like carrot grass, water hyacinth, lantana. Illegal introduction of African catfish for aquaculture purposes is also posing a threat to indigenous catfishes in the rivers. So even alien species invasion are causing the loss of biodiversity. And then co-extinctions. As I mentioned earlier, that when a species become extinct, the plant and animal species which are associated with it, they also become extinct, right? Like for example, when a hotfish species become extinct, its unique assemblage of parasites also meets the same fate. So it is very important to think about biodiversity conservation, because when you talk about evolution, it has taken millions of years of evolution to accumulate this rich diversity in nature. But we could lose all the wealth in less than 2 centuries if the present rate of species losses continue. Therefore, biodiversity and its conservation are vital environmental issues of international concern. More and more people around the world, they have begun to realize the critical importance of biodiversity for our survival and well-being on this planet. So, two questions. Again, when we talk about biodiversity and its conservation, you need to ask two questions to yourself. First, why should we conserve biodiversity, and how do we conserve biodiversity? So, let me answer the first question first. Like, why should we conserve biodiversity? So, there are different arguments which has been placed for conserving for this question. One is narrowly utilitarian arguments. So, according to this argument, the conserving biodiversity is very obvious, because humans, they derive countless benefits, economic benefits from nature, right? Like we get food from the nature, cereals, pulses, fruits, we get firewood, we get fiber, we get construction material, we get industrial products like tannins, dyes, lubricants, resins, perfumes, and even we get products of medical importance, right? Like if you talk about the drug market, 25% of the drugs currently sold in market worldwide, they're derived from plants. And even 25,000 species of plants, they have contributed to the traditional medicines which are used by native people around the world. Then coming to broadly utilitarian argument, which says that biodiversity plays a major role in many ecosystem services that nature provides. We cannot deny this fact that we get oxygen from the plants, right? So again, taking an example of Amazon forest, just imagine, through photosynthesis, how much oxygen it can produce. It is estimated that through photosynthesis, 20% of the total oxygen in Earth atmosphere is being produced by this Amazon forest. Then pollination. Pollination, it's again a very important process, because without this process, plants cannot give us fruits or seeds. So it's another service ecosystem provide through pollination, right? Then aesthetic pleasures also, like when you simply walk through thick woods, just imagine yourself free from this like if you go from some rural areas, you move away from the city, so there is no traffic, there is no pollution, right? So just imagine you are walking in a bit through the thick woods, or watching spring flowers in full bloom, or hearing the song of the birds. So these are the aesthetic pleasures that we get from nature. And yes, ethical. The last is ethical argument for conserving biodiversity, which relates to that what we owe to millions of plants, animals, and microspecies with whom we share this planet. Philosophically or spiritually, we need to realize that every species has an intrinsic value. So it's a moral duty to care for the well-being and for their well-being, and pass on their this biological legacy in good order to future generation. And lastly, coming to how do we conserve biodiversity? So basically, there are two ways we can conserve biodiversity. First is in situ conservation and another is ex situ conservation. So in situ, also called as on-site conservation, and ex situ conservation, which is also called as off-site conservation. So when we talk about in situ, it means that you're protecting an endangered species in its natural habitat. So through IUCN Red List, Red Data Book, we know what are the species which are endangered, right? So in situ conservation, in situ conservation, basically we're protecting the endangered species in its natural habitat. So we are either protecting or cleaning up the habitat itself or defending the species from predator. Like for example, if you want to save tigers, so we can conserve and protect the whole ecosystem. We can save the entire forest to save the tiger. So this approach is called in situ or on-site conservation. However, when we talk about ex situ conservation, it occurs outside the natural habitat. Like there are situations when an animal or plant is endangered or threatened, like facing a high risk of extinction in the wild in the near future, and it needs urgent measures to save it from extinction. We can use ex situ. This approach we can use ex situ conservation. It's the desirable approach. So in this approach, we remove the population from a threatened habitat and we place it in a new location. So it can be any wild area, which can, or within the care of human. And even we use this approach when in situ conservation is too difficult or impossible. So here you can see the examples of in situ conservation and ex situ both. So in situ conservation, it involves biosphere reserves, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, sacred groves and lakes. Now, one more point I would like to tell you here, that practically, if, like in situ, I told you that we can preserve the whole ecosystem, right? But there are like, definitely it's not easy, right? It's very unrealistic. Like many nations find it unrealistic and economically not feasible to conserve all the biological wealth. So, what these nations have done, they have identified biodiversity hotspots. What are biodiversity hotspots? These are the biogeographic region with significant level of biodiversity that is threatened by human habitation. So biodiversity hotspots are the regions with very high level of species richness and high degree of endemism. That is, the species is confined to that region. You will not find that species anywhere else. So because of human habitation, this region will be is been threatened by, because of human habitation, that region is threatened. So biodiversity hotspots is a biogeographic region that is threatened by human habitation, and it is important because it's a region which has a very high level of species richness and high degree of endemism. So it's very important that we can identify these biodiversity hotspots, and then we can come up with some conservation plans, or we can use the approach in situ conservation approach here. So recently 34 biodiversity hotspots in the world has been proposed for intensive conservation efforts, and of these the 3 are present in India. That is Western Ghats, in Sri Lanka, another is Himalaya, and third is Indo-Burma. So 3 of these cover India's rich biodiversity regions. So although all the biodiversity hotspots put together cover less than 2% of Earth's land area, the number of species they collectively harbor is extremely high, and strict protection of these hotspots could reduce the ongoing mass extinction by almost 30%. So here I have mentioned some of the examples of in situ conservation. These are biosphere reserves, so total 18 has been identified. National parks, 106. Wildlife sanctuary, 565. And then we have some sacred groves and lakes as well. So example of national parks. So very first national park, which was established in 1936, is Jim Corbett National Park, right? Uttarakhand. Then we have Hamis National Park, Ladakh, Keoladio National Park, Rajasthan. So to know more about national parks, you can go through this link, okay? Then we have the reserves as well. Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve, Nokrak Biosphere Reserve, Panchmani Biosphere Reserve, right? And examples of ex-situ conservation. So botanical garden, zoo, aquarium, cryopreservation, seed banking, these are all example of ex-situ conservation. So like you know that there are many animals that have extinct in the wild but continue to be maintained in zoological park. Now we can even we can keep the gametes of the threatened species and we can preserve them in the viable and fertile condition for long periods using cryopreservation, storing at a very low temperature. We use liquid nitrogen here. Then tissue culture methods can also be used. Seed banks are also there. Seeds of different genetic strains of commercially important plants can be kept for long period in seed banks. So here are the links if you want to study about, if you want to study more in detail about national parks, sanctuaries, you can refer these links. So in the end, I would like to say that biodiversity knows no political boundaries, and its conservation is therefore a collective responsibility of all the nations. And even it's not only the responsibility of the government or the NGOs, right? Even we have to think about it, what we can contribute in biodiversity conservation. So when we talk about political conservation, like the political boundaries, or when we talk about the nations they are collaborating for taking actions on conservation of biodiversity, so these two historic conventions on biological diversity is very important. So first is Earth Summit, which held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. So here all the nations were being called upon and to take appropriate measures for conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefits. And in the follow-up, World Summit on Sustainable Development was held in year 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa. So 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at not only global level but regional and local levels as well. So all the points that I have mentioned today in this session are very important, and when you're preparing for the exam you have to keep in mind that you have to prepare accordingly. Don't simply jump on the topics. Ask the questions, whatever questions I have mentioned in this session. Just go through that questions and try to answer them. Because once your concepts are clear related to a topic, once you know what is biodiversity, what are its main components, what are the threat to the biodiversity, what are the causes of biodiversity loss, how we can conserve it, so you can easily answer. Once all these concepts are clear, you can easily answer the questions. So here are a few of the examples of the questions that can be asked in the exam. So first question is 70% of animal species recorded are. So whatever questions I have mentioned here, they are all based on the information that I have told you. So if you have paid attention, you will definitely answer such questions. So can you tell me 70% of the animal species recorded are? I mentioned earlier, is it fishes, ants, birds, or insects? Quickly, anyone quickly answer the question. Participants, is it fishes, ants, birds, or insects? What do you think? So it is insects, right? Then another question, the enormous number of varieties of mango in India represents what? Is it genetic diversity, species diversity, ecological diversity, or hybridization programs? So it is genetic diversity. In the very beginning, I told you three main components, and I gave the example of rice varieties, rice strains, and mango varieties. Examples under genetic diversity. Then another question, which of the below mentioned regions exhibit less seasonal variation? This is very easy, right? It's tropics, because less disturbances are there, right? And another question, that from this long-term ecosystem experiments, David Tillman showed that the decreased diversity contribute to higher productivity or decreased productivity, or increased diversity contribute to increased productivity or decreased productivity. So you can see that the options are similar, just that they have just changed the few words, right? So the correct answer is increased diversity contribute to increased productivity. So with this, I have come to the end of the session. I'm sure you have enjoyed the session, and in the coming days, we'll be coming up with some more topics. So stay connected, and thank you, everyone.